According to recent FBI data, hate crimes motivated by anti-Jewish sentiment significantly outnumber those directed at Muslims by a factor of approximately 7 to 1. Nevertheless, certain media narratives, including those advanced by the New York Times, may offer a portrayal of the prevalence and gravity of these issues that diverges from these statistical realities. The Israeli government, for its part, has sharply criticized the Times for what it views as persistent negative coverage of Israel and the Jewish state. Despite these statistical disparities, the New York Times has, at times, dedicated comparable space to anti-Muslim bias as it does to antisemitism, sometimes even surpassing it. This editorial emphasis has drawn criticism from both U.S. and international observers, some of whom argue that accusations of antisemitism have been deployed by political actors to silence legitimate criticism of Israel or justify policy measures. In parallel, critics contend that the classification of legitimate scrutiny of Islamist extremism, the actions of Muslim-majority countries, or connections to organizations with controversial affiliations, as Islamophobia, can serve to stifle open discussion and inquiry. Recent New York Times articles exemplify this approach. For instance, an August 10 article discussed former President Trump's references to Democratic candidates as jihadists, attributing his rhetoric to a broader normalization of anti-Muslim rhetoric within the Republican Party. The article linked Trump's remarks to increased visibility and electoral success of Muslim American politicians, noting his refusal to condemn such language. Critics argue that labeling these comments as Islamophobic may overlook substantive concerns about specific candidates' affiliations or ideological positions. Another Times feature reported on what it described as a rise in Islamophobia in Texas, highlighting state investigations into Muslim institutions and religious practices, as well as derogatory statements targeting Muslim organizations. The newspaper characterized these actions as examples of religious bigotry, while some have pointed out inconsistencies in the paper's coverage of government oversight when applied to other religious groups, such as Christians or Jews. Coverage of political candidates, such as Dr. Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan, has similarly been framed in terms of Islamophobia, especially in the context of allegations about connections to controversial organizations. Critics note that the Times often appears reticent to apply equally strong language to instances of antisemitism, suggesting a double standard in how bigotry is identified and discussed. In another example, coverage of events in Dearborn, Michigan, focused on Muslim communities' experiences of being targeted by provocative actors, but placed less emphasis on recent acts of anti-Semitic violence in the area. Likewise, Times coverage of Jewish life on American campuses has occasionally been used to highlight anti-Muslim bias, despite questions about proportionality and attention across different types of religious discrimination. Quantitative analysis of FBI reports confirms that anti-Jewish hate crimes are far more prevalent than those targeting Muslims. Yet Times coverage, as measured by search frequency of terms related to both forms of bias, approaches parity. For example, in the last year, the newspaper returned similar numbers of articles on antisemitism and Islamophobia, as well as on anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim bias, raising questions about editorial priorities and framing. Broader societal trends, such as increased Muslim participation in public life or the emergence of prominent Muslim-owned businesses, are undoubtedly notable developments. However, critics argue that reflexively categorizing criticism of these developments as Islamophobia risks obscuring complex underlying issues and may contribute to increased polarization or societal backlash.